Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org. Idaho lost more than 2,000 farms over a 5-year period. Idaho Matters wants to know how that's impacting farmers, cities, and counties. Listen to our series on farming called Land and Legacy. Episodes available on Monday afternoons through November 17th in the Idaho Matters podcast feed. From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. And it's Friday, which means it's time for our Reporter Roundtable. We'll get you updated on the news that made headlines this week. Our panel today includes Sarah Cutler, reporter with the Idaho Statesman, and Emma Epperly with Idaho Education News. Hi, both of you. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Sarah, let me start with you. There seems to be a growing rift inside the Idaho Republican Party, and this has to do with some doxing as well as intimidation and online harassment. So, Sarah, can you start out by just explaining how this doxing incident started and why Krista Hazel says it's different this time, and tell us who Krista Hazel is as well?
Sure. So last week, the Republican Central Committee in Kootenai County, Northern Idaho, and that's an official arm of the Republican Party, posted on X and Facebook some old court documents from the 1990s. And it was a criminal complaint against a woman named Krista Hazel, accusing her of stealing about $300 from JCPenney's back in, I think, 1992. And it happens that this document, and in the photos on social media, contains both her birth date and social security number. So Hazel is a volunteer with a group of Republicans in that part of the state who oppose the official party and its approach to politics. And she's been doxxed with this same court document before by some far-right activists. But as you say, this time was different. This was the first time that an official branch of the Republican Party doxed her, put these documents online. And shortly after that, the Dorothy Moon, the chairwoman of the state Republican Party, wrote up a statement of support for this committee. The statement didn't mention doxing at all, but it was broadly talking about that committee's frustrations with Hazel's group of opposing Republicans. And so many people, including Hazel, interpreted these comments as kind of tacit support for the doxing incident.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this, Sarah, the local GOP Central Committee shared these old court documents online, correct? And they shared it on their official party account. So, I'm assuming that's fairly unusual. And what kind of reaction did it garner?
Yeah, that was what got our attention. As far as we're aware, this is the first time that has happened, that a branch of the local Republican Party has actually, through official channels, doxed someone. That was what prompted us to write about this. And I would say it got, a decent amount of negative reaction from the folks that I heard from, particularly among Republicans who maybe view themselves as kind of in opposition to the party's current tactics and maybe more aggressive stance. I will say we talked to the chair of the Kootenai County committee, apologies, and his stance was that the number in that document was not actually Hazel's social security number. It's labeled with a different acronym, but we did confirm by viewing her social security card that it is her social security number. So they were claiming that they had not really doxed her in the way that she claimed. But yeah, it did get a fair amount of negative reaction.
And you did mention Dorothy Moon a moment ago. So she's the party chair, and she said that when she voiced her support, and I believe she did this online, Sarah, that she didn't know about the post when she made this statement of support. So can you talk a little bit about that? And has the state party said anything since this came to light?
Yeah, so we weren't able to get in touch with her while we were reporting the story. However, Dorothy Moon reached out to us after the story and was pretty adamant that her statement of support for the Kootenai County Party Committee was not related to the doxing incident, that she in fact had not been aware of that when she wrote the statement. And she did say, during that conversation that she is not in favor of doxing at all. However, since that conversation and since our story, I'm not aware of the state party coming out and condemning this incident. It's possible that has happened and I haven't seen it, but I'm not aware of a formal condemnation.
So, Sarah, what does this episode tell us really kind of about this deeper divide inside the state's Republican Party right now?
Yeah, I think for us, this is something we've been looking at and hope to continue doing longer term. But I would say it seems that over the last couple of years, at least, there's been a growing rift within the party, not necessarily about ideology, but perhaps more so about tactics. How
Mhm.
whether that's in terms of being really aggressive or going after people in a more personal way. So I think, last election or in 2024, we did some coverage of kind of an offshoot of the state Republican Party here in Boise, the Idaho Majority Club, and they tended to say, it's not really an ideological divide, but we believe that the direction the state party is taking is maybe more aggressive or more, its interactions with others are not something we approve of. So I think that this is kind of a doubling down on that same division over tactics, I would say.
Mhm. And where does this all leave Krista Hazel right now?
As far as I'm aware, those documents have not come down off of social media. Again, I may have missed something. When we spoke with the chair of the state party, I'm sorry, of the county party, his perspective was that unless the court came out that had originally released those documents to the party through a records request, unless the court came out and said that is the social security number and you need to take this down, that the party would not be doing so. As far as I'm aware, she is still dealing with her personal information
Mhm.
being available online.
All right. Appreciate that update, Sarah. So, Emma, Tuesday was election night, and you covered elections up in North Idaho, and you looked at that really closely. So, I wanted to start with the first school district deconsolidation in Idaho in almost 20 years. So, before you remind us what led to the split in the first place, can you remind us what's going on with Mountain View School District and what is a deconsolidation and why it's happening?
Yeah, so Mountain View School District is currently the largest school district in the state by geography. So it's just really huge space-wise, and there have been tensions between the two high schools there and the two communities. There's Clearwater Valley High School in Kuski, and then there's Grangeville High School in Grangeville. And there's just been tensions over really funding. The district has struggled to keep a superintendent employed for years. They've really struggled to pass levies. And they've discussed closing the K-8 school in Elk City, which is kind of between the two high schools. It's a really small school. I think it's got about 12 students right now. So for years, there's been this tension, and they have passed a measure to deconsolidate, which basically means to split into two school districts. One is
Mhm.
Grangeville School District, and the other is Clearwater Valley. And those two school districts will officially separate and be created at the start of next school year.
Okay, so the split then, I'm assuming, Emma, led just to the fact that it's so big, and so they this was the decision the district decided to make.
Yeah, I mean it's really big, but it also there was just this really tension over passing levies, and
Mhm.
so um, the split is in the works. Basically, they have this school year. There's three school boards. There's the Mountain View School Board, there's the Clearwater Valley School Board, and there's the Grangeville School Board. And this year is really to plan for that split. And so both the Grangeville School Board and the Clearwater Valley School Board put a supplemental levy on the ballot for November. And one of those levies passed. Clearwater Valley's passed with 54% of voters in support, but Grangeville's failed with 54% of voters opposed. And this is really surprising to the superintendent out there because the voters in the Grangeville area have always been a bit more supportive of levies than Clearwater Valley's voters. And so it was a surprise at what passed and what didn't. And the school board chair in Clearwater Valley just really isn't, or in Grangeville, just really isn't sure what
Mhm.
they're going to do next.
So any idea or speculation, I guess, from the superintendent or anyone else why Clearwater Valley is passed and Grangeville's levy failed?
Yeah, so obviously there was more concern ahead of the election that Clearwater Valleys wouldn't pass because of that voting history. And so kind of the theory that Alicia Holthouse, the superintendent of Mountain View School District, put out there, and the school board chair for Grangeville, who also is the chair of the Mountain View School Board, Tyler Harrington, they both kind of said, they thought that concern over it not passing in Clearwater Valley cause voters to be talking to each other and to kind of encourage people to get out the vote, to educate people on what a school district without the levy would mean. Versus in Grangeville, they thought, oh, we're going to pass it. Of course, we're going to pass it. Our community's always been supportive of levies. So there wasn't that discussion. Is kind of one theory that was thrown out there. It's also, there was a difference in the levies. The Grangeville levy was for 2 years and the Clearwater Valley was for 1 year. So that could have contributed too.
And I think it's safe to say, Emma, that the Grangeville board members sounded pretty discouraged after this. I mean, they've even said things like they might have to cut sports, they might have to cut electives. You mentioned that they've struggled to hire a superintendent. So how serious could these impacts be?
Yeah, so Tyler Harrington, he is the chair of the Grangeville Board of Trustees, and he really was at his wit's end. They've had really, really for almost a decade struggled to keep a superintendent at Mountain View, and he is just questioning why someone would want to take that risk to come to Grangeville to be the first superintendent there when they can't pay them very well. They are already struggling to get qualified applicants. And so he's really concerned they'll even be able to get a qualified leader of the district. Plus, the levy really pays for sports, it pays for extracurriculars, it pays for teachers above what the state funds. So those teachers often teach electives. It keeps class sizes down. It pays for things like shop class and technology. And so all of that would go away without the levy, and it would really be a bare bones school district, is what Harrington said. And he kind of feels like, maybe we should just let that be what the district is, maybe having an interim superintendent. Their current superintendent, Holthouse, is retired, and she is really helping the district out through deconsolidation, but she's not planning to stay after this school year. She's already extended her contract a few times. And so he is really discouraged and really isn't sure what to do next. His thought is, maybe if we let it be a bare bones district, then voters will see the value that the levy did bring and maybe want to vote for it again in a few years. So he's just really not sure how to move forward.
So, I mean, Emma, as you just mentioned, he's not sure how to move forward. So looking at ahead, what happens then for both districts as they try to really stand on their own financial footing starting next year? I mean, because this split is going to happen. There are going to be two separate school districts come the fall.
Yeah, so Clearwater Valley, obviously they passed their levy. It puts them in a better position to hire a qualified superintendent, who would likely be their school principal as well. They probably can't afford to have just a full-time superintendent. They also might consider, sharing a business manager with Grangeville to save some money. But really, they've got their levy, so they're set for this next school year, and then they can really budget out. For Grangeville, they are going to have a hard time hiring a potential superintendent. They could look at hiring a part-time superintendent and sharing that superintendent with another district. They could share a business manager. They could also run a levy either for the same amount or for a different amount. In May, they could run a 1-year levy. So they do have some options. And, Harrington said, we're going to talk to the community. Clearly, they didn't vote for the levy for a reason. So maybe they want the bare bones district. Maybe they wanted a 1-year levy. They're going to do some community outreach and see how to move forward. They do have some options, though.
So tensions between the U.S. and Canada are actually hitting really close to home here in Idaho, if folks aren't aware of this. especially in North Idaho, up in Bonner Ferry in particular, because Canadian visitors have really been a big part of the economy in Bonner's Ferry for a very long time. And Sarah, there's been a real, like, frankly, tradition of friendship with Canada in the northern part of the state. I mean, Bonner's Ferry even flies the Canadian flag year round. So, how did that become such an important part of the town's identity?
Yeah, I mean, I think on some level it's simply a matter of geography. Bonners Ferry is
Hmm.
under 30 miles from the Canadian border. And so, I think it's just been kind of a tradition that a lot of Canadians come across the border, both for tourism, but even for mundane, errands to fill up the gas tank or shop at local grocery stores. I think that sometimes depends as well on the exchange rate between the Canadian and US dollars. So I think there's just been over the years a lot of kind of casual mixing of these populations and very positive relationships.
So, Sarah, you found that Canadian visits to Idaho are way down this year. So, I mean, what are we talking about here? And do we know what's driving that drop? I mean, is it really about politics?
Yeah, so the numbers were pretty stark. I believe it was about 35% down in Bonners Ferry this year. That's in terms of Canadian visits to the city. And that we were seeing similar numbers overall in terms of Canadians coming in their vehicles across the border into Idaho, and similar numbers nationwide along the US-Canada border. It seems like the drop started around February, but was especially notable this in the summer season when I think, tourism tends to be a bit higher. And yeah, it does really seem to be about politics. I was talking to folks at the Chambers of Commerce in Bonners Ferry, Sandpoint, Coeur d'Alene, and they were all hearing pretty much the same things from would-be Canadian travelers, which was pretty much frustration with President Trump's handling of tariffs against Canada, as well as the president's comments about Canada becoming, the 51st US state.
Hmm.
To some extent, it kind of sounded like people are almost boycotting travel to the US in response.
So, are local leaders in Bonner's very optimistic at all that this relationship can bounce back?
Yeah, I think we heard a fair amount of optimism on this. I think the idea that this is just a temporary pause. In general, the folks I talked to were kind of hesitant to make any broad statements on national politics, but reading between the lines, I think there was some hope that if national politics heads in a different direction, maybe a bit less confrontational with Canada, that, those
Hmm.
effects would trickle down to the local level.
And we're talking about local. What about local businesses? I mean, they've got to be feeling this impact, as you mentioned. And are they doing anything right now to try to bring these visitors back?
Yeah, we got mixed answers on this, I would say. They're definitely feeling the impact. I think in some cases, some businesses were seeing a drop of up to like 50% in the number of Canadians
Wow.
coming and buying, say, tickets for their amusement park. That said, Canadians aren't a huge proportion of the tourists in some of these places, so that might be, let's say, a 10% chunk of the total number of customers. But the businesses we talked to were definitely concerned, that that is still a sizable amount of revenue for them. As for what they're
Hmm.
trying to do to bring them back, some mixed answers there as well. Um, some cities are continuing to advertise in Canada as they always do to say, come on and visit. However, we heard from the Coeur d'Alene Visitor Bureau that they actually decided to pause their advertising. They felt it wasn't a good use of money right now. I think the guy there told me, they're not entirely happy with us, so we'll hold off on advertising for the moment.
Hmm.
So, I think that there's a sense of when they're in dialogue with Canadians who had thought about coming and decided not to, I think folks were trying to emphasize the long, positive local relationships and saying, hey, what's going on at the national level is far away. We hope you'll keep coming back. But I think time will
Hmm.
tell how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Emma, Idaho voters weighed in on more than $150 million in school funding requests from bonds to levies during Tuesday's election. And we talked a little bit earlier about some of those, but I'm curious. This was a really big election night for schools across the state. Was there anything that stood out to you the most about these results?
Yeah, well, my colleague Kevin Richer did some really great kind of analysis on the election, and so of the 26 school districts that ran a supplemental levy this week, 17 passed, which is a 65% success rate. It's a drop from May when 22 of the 24 supplemental levies passed at a 92% success rate. And historically, from 2016 to 2024, so a 9-year period, voters approved 94% of all supplemental levies. So that success rate is dropping. It's also really difficult to pass a bond. None of the bonds passed on Tuesday, which are to build buildings or for facilities improvements. A lot of these elections were really close. The Marsh Valley School District and Valley School District, they went back to voters after their supplemental levies were rejected in May, and both of those did not pass. Things were just really, really close. There was a couple levies that were just, a handful of votes away from passing, or a handful of votes caused them to fail. So
a lot going on there. Well, and if you want more analysis, make sure you do go to Idaho Ed News and read that full analysis as well. I want to thank both of you so much for all of the reporting you've done, for spending part of your lunch hour with us as well. So we've been talking with Sarah Cutler, reporter with Idaho Statesman, and Emma Epperly with Idaho Education News. You've been listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. I'm Gemma Gaudette.
The stories don't stop when this podcast does. Boise State Public Radio's Instagram gives you reels, updates, and snapshots from our reporters in the field. Follow Boise State Public Radio on Instagram today.